Hello, welcome. My name is Carolyn Parker Fairbairn. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a member of the For Freedom Student Organizing Committee, and we'd love to welcome you all to our We Are For Freedom's virtual town hall. I'd like to open by acknowledging our neighboring Indigenous nations whose land the university has usurped, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. Now, I'd like to read a piece by Adrienne Marie Brown titled A Complex Movement. A complex movement. Over and over again, it becomes known. The peace we seek is seeking us, the joy a full bud, awaiting our attention, justice in our hands, longing to be practiced, the whole world learning from within, this thrilling moat in the universe, laboratory, labyrinth, internalized demands. You are the one you are waiting for. Externalized love, bind us together into a greater self, a complex movement, a generative abundance, an embodied evolution. Learn to be here. Critique is a seductress. Her door is always open. So what if you get some? We are going further, past reform, to wonder. This requires comprehension that cannot fit in words. Out beyond our children, beyond the end of time, there is a ceaseless cycle, a fractal of sublime. And we come to create it, to soil our hands and faces, loving, loving, and loving ourselves and all our places. By Adrienne Marie Brown. Thank you. And now, Amanda.
Hello, I'm Amanda Herman. Thanks so much for that, Caroline. I'm the education curator at the University Museum of Contemporary Art, and I want to join Caroline and the whole For Freedom Student Organizing Committee to thank you for being here tonight. We're going to have an hour ahead of us of art, conversation, and inspiration. Before we begin, I'd love to do a little housekeeping. I want you to take a moment to just check your screen settings. You'll notice your microphone is muted, and we ask you keep it this way until the conversation section of the evening. As for your video, you can have that on or off, just as you prefer. There's a chat function at the bottom of your screen that allows you to message everyone in the group or just one person, and the default is set to everyone. If you need help at any time, don't hesitate to reach out in the chat to myself or to the co-host Emma Messer from the Fine Arts Center, and we'll be happy to assist you. So Carol, myself, and the rest of our For Freedom Student Organizing Committee are your guides for this evening. You'll meet the rest of the students soon, but first I'll give you a brief overview of what to expect. I'm going to start with an introduction to the larger For Freedoms project that we're a part of. Then we'll introduce you to our guest artist, Carol Lynch. After we hear from her and watch a short video of her own, you'll be put into breakout groups with one of the committee members. And then we'll have a conversation guided by questions created by the committee. At the end of the hour, we'll come back together as a group to share and reflect. So tonight's event is part of We Are For Freedoms, which is a multi-artist commission, exhibition, and public program series at the UMCA this fall and in the spring of next year. The project is in partnership with For Freedoms, a national artist-led organization that encourages creative civic engagement, discourse, and direct action. For Freedoms works with artists and organizations like ours to center the voices of artists in public space, to expand what participation in a democracy looks like, and to reshape conversations about politics. The UMCA partnered with For Freedoms in 2018 in the lead up to the midterm elections. We had a town hall then titled Art, Activism, and Social Injustice. This event brought together artists, scholars, students, and others to share their work and discuss the avenues and limits to using art as a way to activate concrete social change. This current exhibition comes at a crucial time in our country as we live through two unprecedented major upheavals, the COVID pandemic and global calls for racial justice. Four Freedoms has reimagined themselves for this current crisis and set new priorities. Their new focus is on awakening and listening, healing and justice. Four Freedoms has expanded to include a coalition of creative people called the Wide Awakes. And with this vast network, they're launching a series of art actions and interventions in public space designed to invigorate, spread joy, and work towards justice. We at the UMCA are part of this movement. In addition to tonight, there will be a series of events planned by the Four Freedoms Student Organizing Committee throughout the academic year. This spring, the museum will open the We Are for Freedoms exhibition. The UMCA commissioned 10 local and regional artists to make posters that respond visually to their interpretation of freedom. These original works will be displayed next to large stacks of reproductions of the posters, free art for visitors to the museum to take and spread the messages widely. The exhibition will also include a visual history of Four Freedoms' work and materials from the UMass Special Collections Social Justice Archive. Tonight's event kicks off what is at the core of this project, a series of conversations or town halls focused on urgent issues important to our students and our community. Carolyn, whom you just met, started as a UMCA intern this summer. She dreamed up and leads the Four Freedoms Student Organizing Committee, a group of incredible UMass students, some of who you'll meet tonight. The committee serves as a student voice within the museum. Our goals are to be an intentionally decolonized space, embodying the best practices of the group's development, and to use arts programming to infuse these ideologies in the community at large. I now want to hand things over to committee member Sophia, who will introduce the work of our guest artist, Kara Lynch, one of the artists in the We Are for Freedoms exhibition.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sophia. I use she, they pronouns. Also, let me know if you can't hear me. I'm pleased to introduce you to our guest artist tonight, Kara Lynch. Kara says her art practice is a poetics, a process, a transfiguration, a meditation. It's a grounding for autonomy for Black and Indigenous people across the diaspora. It is a rememory, vision, and movement. Kara is based in the Bronx, New York, and was born in the momentous year of 1968. She's completed the MFA in Visual Arts at the University of California, San Diego, and has been a research fellow at the African and African Studies Department at the University of Texas, Austin, and the Academy of African Studies at Beirut University in Germany. She is an emeritus professor of video and critical studies at New Hampshire College, and in 2020, Kara has been awarded a Tulsa Artist Fellowship and has joined Gallery of the Streets as a principal artist collaborator. Ambivalent towards hypervisual culture, she is curious about duration, embodiment, and sound experiments. And through lo-fi, collective practice, and social intervention, Lynch explores aesthetics and political relationships between time and space. This artist practice is vigilantly race, class, and gendered, as in Black, queer, and feminist. Her major projects include Black Russians, a featured documentary video, The Outing, a video travelogue, We Travel the Space Waves, Black Imagination, Fragments, and Distractions, an edited volume of Black Speculation. And the current project is called Invisible, which is an episodic, speculative, multi-site video and audio installation that excavates the terror and resilient beauty of Black Indigenous experience. We are so honored and happy to have you tonight and to share your work and to take, all the themes that are within this event, which include survival, resilience, and healing. And so I love for us to honor Kara into this space.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Before I roll into kind of an artist talk, I want to do a brief land acknowledgement of my own, because I'm in Indian territory right now. I'm speaking to you from Tallahassee, or Tulsa, Oklahoma Indian Territory, which is Muskogee Creek land, and also the site of the Greenwood race massacre in 1921. So just to land you all also in Tulsa. And then as a way of linking to Massachusetts, I want to use my sort of land acknowledgement of around Massachusetts by sharing with you an exchange that I had with David Detmold, who is an Indigenous person in the Great Falls, which most of you know is Turner's Falls, while I was doing research for my poster for the We Are for Freedoms. And so David is very much involved in the campaign to change the Massachusetts flag and seal. And when I asked him about it, he shared with me this observation. So he, in thinking about why people are against or resistant to changing the seal and the flag, what he's heard is that people say, "You're trying to change our history." And this is a quote of David. "When I hear this, I always reply, no. Unfortunately, we can't change the terrible history, but we can do our best to seek a more peaceful, respectful, harmonious future. And part of that effort is to remove the racist legacies of white supremacy that are everywhere embedded in the landscape and in the symbols we use to retell and extol our history." And I really appreciate that because I see my work in conversation with this. If we are thinking about how Black and Indigenous people are impacted structurally by settler colonialism, what does it look like to make art and to activate ourselves in resistance to this legacy? So I'm going to read a story. Caw, caw, rustle, rustle, a swish of black above catches her attention. She looks up and a big looming black bird soars towards the horizon. At the dividing line of sky and earth, she sees a swirl of wind and dust jumping across the horizon. The tornado reaches a pump of steel towering in the distance and swallows it, dances a dervish around it, jumps again. The oil drill is gone, poof. The tornado spits a crow into the air to join the other. One by one, the tornado skips along, plucking oil wells from the wide expanse. And instead of a flow and gush of thick sludge crude, a crow ascends to the group with this mysterious murmuring flock. The girl stands mesmerized by each link in the chain. She no longer fears the gusts of wind and soil in its dervish, though she does get down on her knees to pray. The ominous flock hovers above the twister. Pluck, pluck, pop, pop, caw, caw. Anyone who is really listening can hear the last oil well pulley yawn to a halt. So in March of 2020, while I was on an alternative artist residency that turned into a global pandemic stay-at-home order in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, or otherwise known as Bulbancha, I began to find another rhythm. With the stay-at-home order, I found myself waking up at 4 a.m. and instead of fighting it, I got up to see what this early morning rise was all about. And every day I would write, and that story came from that 4 a.m. writing. And then with the first light, I would leave the house and begin to walk. And these long 2-hour walks through the bayou and neighborhoods and parks and this writing were sparks to a conversation about pause. and about reversing the rule of the greedy and the speedy that I'm thinking of now as abolition time or abolition rhythm, and thinking about what it means to practice freedom. And this conversation is also with Sylvia Wynter, who is a feminist writer and visionary. And she wrote a play called Masquerade. And in it, she pushes for the reverse of rule and talks about masquerade time, this pause, as a time when the old rhythms will come back. And one of the characters shouts, the rule is share, the rule is laugh, the rule is love, and talks about reversing rule. So currently what I've been doing is working with this project called Gallery of the Streets as a principled artist. And as part of the conversation around what would it take to reverse the rule, to bring in an abolition rhythm or an abolitionist time, we're asking the question, what is abolitionist art in a time of genocide? And the video that I'm going to show as a way of sparking your imaginations was my first initiation. Let's call it an invocation for my contribution to Gallery of the Streets. So we could play the video. Now the other face appear, the face that hide behind eyes, the fact and the is that life too hides in this affair. Life too has its plan and purpose, one that go far beyond their schemes and dreams. For the fact that life keep back like a wild card in the situation, to play it like a joker on the time, on the occasion. It's the earth herself that danced that step, the living law that make man, that embody in her flesh rhythm, its commandment in the pattern of her step. And as the rhythm step, the rhythm say, share my earth in common, share food as you share my rain, life's chance as you share my sun, or I, the earth, will wipe you out. Now in ordinary time, what the earth say? No sweat. In everyday time, you look out for number one. Grab all you can, that's cool, go on. It's for you that rule. Ordinary time is your time. Come on strong, power and throne. Hog up all life's chances, wealth, woman, so you won. Who complain, thump them in their mouth, lick every teeth down their throat. But wait until ordinary time done. Wait until the edges of the year have met, when 360 days of ordinary time pass and gone. Then the time that marked by the wax and wane of the moon appear at last. The 5 days, feast days that are out of time, the holy days, the masquerade time, ordinary time reversed. Power uncrowned, the king dethroned, number one out for the count. The queen, mother, rule in. The rule reversed, the rule is share, the rule is love. All over the world, the rule is share, the rule is love. In the time that time reversed, laugh all over the world. The rule is laugh. The fool enthroned as Lord of all and give command. Break down all ranks, bring all men to the ground, purge all hate, remove all grudge. Let love flow. And dance, dance to the rhythm of life's pattern. Here is where, now is when, life trump with her ace. For since life knows, in our masquerade play, is the old law that right in the rhythm of her step. Life plot it, so the new law that say take, come into confrontation with the old law that say share, give back, or I, the earth, will wipe you out. So my intention is to end with that video, but I want to really thank the organizers of the exhibition and also of this town hall for inviting me. And I look forward to speaking with some folks in the breakout room about what abolition rhythm and time feels like, looks like, sounds like, and how we'll make it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kara, for sharing your work with us, for setting the stage for tonight's discussion. I think it's an awesome way to think about this reimagining and moving into our discussion about survival, healing, and resilience. So just to introduce myself, hi, my name is Laritza. I'm part of the For Freedom Student Organizing Committee. I've really enjoyed working on this committee, making more inclusive, creative spaces while centering decolonial practices. I'm really excited to do this tonight and have you all join us so that we can work on fostering healing and resilience in our own communities. So just to center ourselves, we find ourselves today and within the last couple of months in a time like any other. Our daily lives are shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have global struggles against oppressive powers and brutality. On a national level, we would like to acknowledge the pain and grief looming nearby with the recent Supreme Court confirmation and the upcoming presidential election. We want to root our healings in the past and the present and acknowledge that these struggles will all affect us differently. So just tonight, we want to open up the space and have a space to discuss themes of survival, healing, and resilience with our fellow community members. We will be opening up breakout rooms for small groups to discuss tonight's guiding questions, and we'll make sure to put those in the chat as well for you guys. So we'll do small groups, and we'll do that with we'll have a facilitator in each room to kind of just lead the discussion. So the questions are, what are survival strategies from the past that may help us in the present moment? What does healing look like in your community? What are new ways we can build resilience? And where do you find joy and hope? And so if you feel like those questions are too restrictive, if you feel like you're not quite sure how to approach them, we have a little word cloud written out for you guys. I just dropped it in the chat, basically just around these themes, and just make sure you make that discussion to be a welcoming and useful space for you and for your other members. And before we break out into the discussion group, Sophia's gonna provide us a little overview for the community guidelines for our discussions. So I'll just pass it off to her.
Thank you, Laritza. So within these spaces, even through virtual interactions, our group utilizes the ideals and practices from circle process. The circle process is originally practiced by indigenous peoples of this nation to be in community with one another. That is intentionally away from the government and the carceral state. For me, I'm defining the carceral state as police, ICE, foster care, and psych wards. This process allows for the formation of relationships by honoring the voices of all who reside within the circle, which is meant to symbolize unity. Circle process relies upon personal narrative, analysis, and observation of one's own experience. Being in circle, for me, symbolizes an unbreakable and infinite sphere as it relies heavily upon the interconnectedness between its participants and all things that are living right now. And even the way that we rotate and we converse to one another is meant to connect us to the movement of the stars above us, right? So before we engage in this exciting conversation, it is vital that we ground ourselves with some values that our collective holds every single time we are in space with one another. These community guidelines are almost exactly the ones that we personally use every week together when we come together. So the first one is speak and listen from the heart and with respect, remain in circle, silence is valuable, center care in all this work, engage with your capacity at interest, be an active listener, take risks, imagine, recognize collective power, making conversations open and accessible, finding appropriate ways to give feedback, and being mindful, active one another. So we're gonna put in the chat. Yeah, I'm gonna just put those community guidelines in the chat. I know I went a little fast. So I'm just really want this conversation to begin. And just so y'all know, after these conversations, if everyone is comfortable having like a representative or a speaker from your group to just briefly mention what y'all talked about. Again, like let's try to move away from like the personal narrative storytelling and more, broader thematics that are being said in that space. So if anybody has any questions, please let me know. I know at least me and Carolyn do define as, circle process practitioners. We do this. So if you have any questions, like, again, hit us up if anything about this structure in our conversation is confusing. So let's get it rolling. And yeah.
We're just waiting a moment right now for everyone to return. Oh, good, everyone's back. Hi, everyone. So glad that we had this time to have our discussions together. My name is Alice Erickson, and I'm a part of the Four Freedoms Student Organizing Committee. As a part of this committee, I'm invested in creating and participating in spaces where everyone has a voice and where we're all encouraged to be authentic. And thank you so much for participating in our breakout session. Sharing and listening from the heart can seem daunting, but it's really how we make connections and create change. So now that we're all gathered back together, we'd love for a member from each group to share with all of us about your discussion and some things to consider. You can share with us some themes or thoughts that kept coming up in your time together. And I would personally love to hear, and I'm sure everyone would love to hear, what did your group envision as far as healing and joy? So could someone from the representative from group one, could you unmute yourself and please share with us how your discussion went? Anyone from group one?
Talia.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Talia, I think that's us.
Sorry, I didn't know we were group one.
I do that in my Zoom meetings for class all the time. I don't remember, so.
So my group talked about, for themes, we talked about Parable and Adrienne Marie Brown. And I mentioned Iron Cages by George Takei. So for the first questions, we talked about strategies, thinking about the future and like Afrofuturism, thinking about like queer communes and like creating spaces that are safe and with like-minded people, but also like the downside to that where creating havens could be problematic or like could still have to deal with like the outside society. And so what does that look like, trying to hold both and still be able to hold other folks accountable while also still creating safe spaces for yourselves. We also talked about healing in terms of like trying to find community virtually and how that feels very different, especially as human beings who crave like being like in-person interactions and like personal relationships, and like how people crave community. And so like what does community look like and feel like when you can't be in person, and how that's been a struggle for all of us because people who, now we have to really decide who is in our community, like who can be in our physical community, and like how small that might look, or how impossible it might be to actually have that community depending on like home situations. And so those are things we talked about.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. So I'd love for someone from group 2 to share.
I had the good fortune to be in that group with Amanda and Kathleen, and wonderful. Yes. So we talked a lot about healing and methods of healing and what we're all thinking about at the moment, looking at literature, looking at art, the repercussions, the ways in which we could look at ourselves as ways to provide that kind of healing, that it really comes from within. So sometimes events would be beyond our control, but we could then not overreact. I think that was brought up in our group, and I think looking back in history, past events. From the era when witch hunts and persecution occurred in the 1600s, the early settlers, and then the pogroms in Europe, and it's throughout history. But thinking about how we today can better react and fortify ourselves from within to then be the healers to offer to others. I don't know if anyone else in our group wanted to add to that. I'm not sure if I was offering enough information as to how we spoke, but
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. So would anyone from, what are we on, group 4? That was my group. I don't know, Holly had said she would if she was able to come back. She had to step away to the stove. So Holly, are you back yet? Okay, so Diana, would you like to share with the group what we talked about and kind of the themes that came up for us, and how we talked about healing and joy?
I will do my best. Well, we talked about using our own past strengths and learning to be able to share our story, that possibly someone can learn from what we've already gone through. That our joys are coming with trusting our community, whether it be immediate or online. Because right now, there are many different communities online, and they can be as close as, your surrounding, or it can be a group of artists, which that's happened in my case. That's my community. They're not exactly living next door, but my community is online right now. That our joys are shared when we share our stories and help other people maybe to learn from what we've already gone through. I think that covered it.
Yes, thank you, Diana. And so I see in the chat that I skipped group 3. I'm very sorry. I'm trying to remember numbers too myself. So I'd love to hear the representative from group 3 share what you guys talked about and how you envision healing and joy.
Yeah, so our group was very heterogeneous, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. And so we introduced and tried to get to know each other a bit. So we talked about the theme that came up among all of us was nature and engaging with it, going outside, needing to be outside, being in this, as someone called it, the cage of Zoom all the time, and how physically, taking care of ourselves. Before we even got to community, I would have loved to talk about community, and we were just getting there. But we were talking about taking care of ourselves and spending time appreciating the stars and trees and just reconnecting, because we feel so disconnected, and sleeping enough, like physically moving, because we're trapped in front of the screen. So those were some of the themes.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Was that it? I don't want to.
I was just going to ask if anyone else wants to weigh in, but I think they can.
Okay, so I'd love for the representative from Group 5 to share with us what you guys talked about in the trajectory of your conversation and some healing and joy.
Yeah, so I was in group 5 with Kara and with Jessica. And then a lot of the stuff we talked about was surrounding, well, first we started off with like this idea of healing and like building up emotional capacity and kind of restocking that capacity. We also talked about the idea of roots, of like being grounded in something, reconnecting with your community, where we come from. In terms of community, we talked about, especially regarding the pandemic, our own unique situations, and then how, like the other group said, like building trust within that community and being more conscious of how that affects other people. And we also related that back to the George Floyd uprisings, and how this idea of communities being built within movements, and just using that and combining it with healing to make sure that we're at full capacity.
Well, thank you. And so now Group 6, which I believe is our final group. If there's a Group 7, let me know. I was told we'd have 6 groups. So if someone from Group 6 would like to share with us, I'd really appreciate that. There was not a Group 6. Okay, well then that's everything. You know, I thank you guys so much for sharing with us. And while everyone was sharing, I was really intentionally just trying to listen, and I wrote down actually some of the words and themes that were coming up as everyone was sharing. So I kind of would like to share those back collectively to everyone. So this is the idea of engaging with nature, engaging with community, building intentional community, sharing our stories, building trust with each other and in our communities, healing ourselves from within with things like movement and nature and connection. There's talk about self-care and how to, I think, facilitate healing within ourselves and how to offer those things to others, and how to hold space for each other and how to create safe spaces. Thank you everyone for contributing to these discussions. We really appreciate your voices and your vulnerability. In conversation with each other, we are seen, we are heard, and we can look forward to the future together. Thank you.
Hello. So we'd like to thank you all for coming, and we'd love to see you all again in the spring. So look to the UMCA website for updates on future committee events and the We Are for Freedoms exhibit coming spring 2021. And in closing, I'd like to activate y'all with a few questions. We'd like to ask you to meditate on where you want us to go and bring one thing into your everyday that will help us get there. And now I'll read a final poem, again from Adrienne Marie Brown, from Emergent Strategy, titled Love is an Emergent Process. I stand before my love and let the tendrils unfurl. In every direction I am whole and becoming. Time is one instance, examining itself, mirrors, seeing each other, and blushing into eternity. I am the ant who carries grandfather to the grave. In my palms you lift the next day's meal, enough for everyone we know. We love in this rhythm, leaving home and returning on the wind. Love can't look away from itself, vibrating in the cell, fluttering breathless into sustained migration. I feel you, like dust feels water and remembers the home galaxy. It appears nothing is new, never was, and nothing is truly massive when seen in its wholeness. Until I took this breath, repeating the miracle, I didn't know I would say it, could not have known. I look to the sky, taste the wind on my tongue, and fling myself into the pattern when I forget, when I think the end is near, I realize my significance as important as yours and begin to love again. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Everyone for coming.